Good morning on this Sunday, April 24th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. 8 days from now, early voting begins in the May primary as candidates for governor and Senate heat up the airwaves. Also, critics are questioning a change in automatic voter registrations at the DMV, and a new study out shows Atlanta was in the top 3 when it comes to the homicide rate during the pandemic. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Martha are here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Well, it's hard to believe, but early voting in the May primary is right around the corner, May 2nd. Candidates with competition in the primaries are stepping up with new ads and strategies. Among them, Republican David Perdue, who indirectly points the finger at Governor Brian Kemp for high gas prices and crippling inflation. In his ad, he says Brian Kemp sold us out and allowed radicals to steal the election. Phil, I imagine this ad would play well in some of the rural areas in Georgia. What do you think about this strategy?
Well, that's right. In this GOP gubernatorial primary, it is heating up, as we've predicted, with television and with videos that are being emailed out and shared on social media. I think that it's interesting when you look at the surveys, the negative ads are probably going to take a toll, and of course the positive ads always push a candidate up. So the goal of the Perdue gubernatorial campaign is very simple. It wants a runoff. And we've talked about that before. And if Kemp can't reach the 50%, and that's why you're seeing all these ads now, there'll be a runoff in June, and that could spell some trouble for an incumbent.
Theron, what do you think about the possibility, of a runoff on the Republican side?
Well, it's really going to all come down to turnout, and if they can really make sure that they bring out the Perdue voters, and they got to expand his base a little bit to take out an incumbent governor. But what I thought was very interesting about the ads, Lori and Phil is right. I mean, we knew this was coming. A lot of the PACs, a lot of the outside organizations, dark money, I like to call it on the Republican side, has started to kind of kick in. But let's just call balls and strikes. David Perdue has got to definitely point out the things that are wrong with Brian Kemp, but he's also got to make a transition to say, I will be a better governor than Brian Kemp, and this is why. And I think beyond just focusing on things that happened in the past, he's blaming him for the high gas prices and other things like that. He's got to make a shift to tell voters, why are you better than the current governor that they have?
That's a great point. And Martha, how difficult is that for David Perdue, since Republicans really like the way Governor Kemp has handled the pandemic, the economy, the legislative session?
Well, I don't think Senator Perdue thought that it was going to be an easy thing. And one of the things that he's going to be focusing on is education, because that is the #1 issue, I think, for 2022. So he'll be talking about that and how he might be different than Governor Kemp is. But you're right. It's very difficult to make the case when, as we have pointed out, all of us, a number of times on this panel, that the legislative session was very positive. There now is a bill signing tour going on, which is very positive. The press is positive. And there's a lot of get out the vote kind of events that are happening. So look, it was an uphill climb from the beginning, I think, for Senator Perdue, and I think he's seeing that that's happening. And the money advantage is very large, and it's going to make a difference.
Melita.
Perdue continues to say that the election was stolen. And so the credibility problem that raises with many Republicans, I think, is a big one. And do people continue to buy into the stolen election false claim, or do they look at other issues?
Well, let's talk about the Governor Kemp, because he's out on the airwaves and on the stump talking about his strategy during the pandemic and keeping Georgia's economy open. Stacey Abrams, though, was quick to criticize his handling of the pandemic, Martha.
Look, she was completely wrong to do that, because even on MSNBC this week, the people were saying how positive that even though they love picking on Florida and Georgia because they opened early, that when you look at the data, they have better economies and they had no worse outcome from the pandemic than anybody else did. So I think, Governor Kemp is right to be taking a little bit of a victory lap on this, because Georgia's in a great position because of how he led the state.
Melita's about to jump out of her seat over there.
Yes. Well, you can't say that Georgia had no worse outcome when Georgia had more deaths than neighboring North Carolina. Georgia has a population of 10.8 million, and more than 37,000 people died. In North Carolina, where the population is 10.6 million, 23,000 died. That's a disparity of 14,000 deaths, and that's not something that the families of those extra 14,000 should take lightly.
Well, Phil, how, if these two are in a head-to-head matchup, how do you see the handling of the pandemic playing out leading up to November?
Well, I think if you look back at what happened during those 2 COVID years, you have to balance everything between, yes, deaths that have resulted from COVID, but also the damage that was done with closures, with school closures, with the rise of fentanyl cases and suicides. I've always given Governor Kemp credit for trying to do that balance 2 years ago. But I will say this to Martha's point about, yes, it was a good legislative session for Kemp on some of these issues, especially some of the conservative issues. But Perdue, I think, very cleverly points out he wouldn't have done a lot of this if I hadn't been running from the right and he had to enact things that would help the right.
Theron, how does Stacey Abrams handle this, handling of the pandemic? She came out quickly to criticize Governor Kemp's handling of it, but there are a lot of moderates and even some Democrats who are ready to move on.
Well, that's it. So a lot of us, I think we all agree that while we're still taking this deadly pandemic seriously, we can't go back to where we were 2 years ago. But to Melita's point, just to add a few more statistics, 2 million people in Georgia got COVID, right? 100,000 people were hospitalized. And then, as she mentioned, 37,000 people have died. And so it's really this delicate balance of, okay, if it were to happen again, are we prepared? And yes, Governor Kemp is going to run on the, hey, I kept the economy open, which is a bipartisan, it transcends race. People wanted to run their businesses, but you got to go back to were we truly prepared? And we can't forget there were some gaps there. We remember talking about this 2 years ago. He went on national TV and said something that he didn't mean to say, and so he got pretty much blamed on that. And so I think Stacey's got to continue to do what she's doing. She's got to have that contrast. But the fact remains is, if it were to happen again, are we prepared? And which governor is best to make sure that we get through that phase?
All right, let's move on to the Senate race, because Senator Raphael Warnock is out with a new ad, and his message basically says, I'm a senator, I'm a dad, but I'm not a magician, and I can't change Washington overnight. Theron, back to you, because I want to ask you about this strategy. He's laying it out there, but Republicans jumped on him saying, oh, well, he's obviously, throwing in the towel.
No, I think what was very interesting about this ad, and other Republicans have always talked about the puppies in the Christmas lights. Now they're going to criticize him on a clever way of sort of pointing out all his qualifications. He's a dad, he's a pastor, right? And now he's a senator. But what he also did, Laura, is that look at the ad and look at the headlines that are going across, the still shots of the headlines. All these jobs, things that he's been doing all across the state of Georgia. To me, that's where he needs to be judged on. And so not only does he look good, he sounds good, and he's been delivering for Georgia. And Republicans hate that, but just look at the commercial. There's a lot of things that he's taking the lead on that Georgia's benefiting from right now.
Phil and Martha are smirking. Martha, to you first.
Look, he had to come out with one more positive ad, because he's going to have to come with the onslaught here pretty soon of negative advertising, which won't look as good on him. Look, I want to know where he got that half zip, because I think David Perdue wore it all last year in his Senate campaign, so we'll see how that happens. But anyway, I just think that he did bring out a good point that a year is not very long, but he also spent the first part of his term being very radical as far as his positions, and has moderated since then. We've talked about that. And, look, we'll see what happens. He still doesn't want to do a lot of interviews or get out there a lot. If you look at him compared to Senator Ossoff, yeah, people say Ossoff is in a full term, but Warnock is trying to defend his seat. Senator Warnock needs to be more available.
Melita?
But he's certainly more available than Herschel Walker. And that's who
Actually,
the
he's
presumed.
not.
Not
if you
anymore.
look at the numbers.
That's old news. He's getting out there. He's doing interviews.
But I think Warnock at least has a grasp of a number of issues that Walker does not have. And I think that Warnock, he's made great strides with the insulin cap on prices, and he has some really strong policies that he's pushing. And I just don't see that he is conceding with this ad.
Well, Phil, to that point, Senator Warnock has disagreed with the Biden administration on some issues.
Only lately.
Well, what do you think about this move from, as Martha said, going from far left to more moderate?
He's looking at the polls and what people are saying, especially the very critical independent vote that have turned against Biden and the Democrats. You can see it in all of the polling. And so a year ago, he was proclaiming, oh, we're going to have tremendous change with all of this, Biden socialist, big government, big tax policy. And now he's seeing that's not selling anymore. And I have to say that Herschel Walker is doing more interviews now, and I've interviewed him, Martha has. He has really stepped up his game with regard to key policy issues where he might have been a little wobbly 2-3 months ago. You laugh, but he's also, Warnock's down in the polls still with Warnock.
Well, y'all were just on here 2-3 weeks ago saying that Herschel needs to get out more. I mean, Senator Warnock since January 6th has been all across the state. I mean, y'all remember the scene the earned media. So to come on this show and say that he hasn't been visible and he hasn't been doing interviews, that's just blatantly false. Now, he does need to come on your show, and I can help you with that because I helped y'all a little bit with John Ossoff. But you can't compare what this senator has been doing. Every time he comes to the state, he's all over Georgia. He's going around making announcements, and he's working with people. So I just think that to say that Herschel Walker is comparable to what he's doing.
Let me tell you something, but being a one-year senator, I think he makes a point that that's a difficult thing, and I'm going to try to be as fair as I can be in this statement that I'm going to make. Kelly Loeffler got more done in a year than almost any senator ever has, and she lost to Raphael Warnock. Raphael Warnock is acknowledging that he's only had a year to really show what he's going to do, and that it's a very difficult election for a 6-year election.
I take the ad differently. I think what he's saying, in only a year, I've been able to do all of these things. It's totally different. He's not saying, "Hey, I've only been here for a year."
People got the message mixed up.
No. I think that for us, people who support him and people who probably are sort of persuadable, I think what he's saying. Well, first of all, he's good looking, he's funny, and he's engaging, and he's not coming off as a traditional politician, which is a lane that he really owns right now. But what he's saying is that in only a year, when Republicans have made their #1 effort to stop Democrats, I've been able to work with Republicans who want to work with me and work with Georgians and leaders to get things done.
Well, that is a new message because he was in lockstep for most of the year with Joe Biden attacking the gas and fossil fuel industry. That's going to haunt him.
Quickly, Melita, because they're giving me the wrap.
The nice thing is that Warnock is going to have enough money to put out a wide array of multiple ads.
Yes, he will. All right, coming up, a decline in automatic voter registrations. Could it change at the DMV? Be to blame.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
The AJC reported this week a major change at Georgia Department of Motor Vehicles. Instead of an automatic opt-in to register to vote when you apply for a driver's license, you now have to check a box. Now, critics say they want an investigation after automatic registrations dropped from 79% in 2020 to 39% last year. Martha, I'll start with you because you weren't really in favor of the automatic opt-in.
No, because I think that's how you end up with people who don't really understand that they're registering to vote and maybe don't want to vote if it's an automatic opt-in. But I have not been able to get to the bottom of this either. I've talked to a number of people about it. They say it was a glitch and it was just a simple yes or no answer. I don't think it's a problem with having to affirmatively say, yes, I want to register to vote. I don't think that's a problem. You do that when you fill out an application to vote. You have to take that initiative. But I do think that it's something that needs to be looked into.
Melita, I mean, I told them yesterday on Road to November, like my journalism antenna went up because I was like, who did this change?
Right. Who did it? And nobody's answered that question.
Nobody explained why. They say it was a computer upgrade, but somebody had to program the computers.
Right. Computers don't upgrade themselves. So who made the change? Who made the decision that it would change? And it has created confusion. And there will be people who think they are registered to vote. Maybe they've moved and they're not. So that's going to create some confusion, and it's worrying elections officials. And this change could result in 1 million fewer registrations a year. That's a significant number.
Phil?
Well, I think it is a programming issue, and so it was programmed that way. But I would remind the viewers that basically you've got 2 million registered voters in the state of Georgia that in the last general election just didn't vote. I'm like Martha. I think you ought to be able to opt in if you're a citizen and really want to register to vote.
But Theron, I mean, any change to any registration or it's going to come under scrutiny.
These things just don't happen by themselves, right? And so it's a conspiracy. Let's just call it what it is. And Lori and Phil and Martha and others have said it. They go around the state and they talk about how it's not going to be all this voter suppression, right? They say we're going to have the highest turnout we ever had in the state of Georgia. But the other thing that y'all always gave credit to former Governor Nathan Deal. I know he probably still watches the show, so shout out to the governor.
Yes.
Is that y'all talked about motor voter, right? Saying that this was your number one reason why voter suppression was not going to happen. So shout out to Carolyn Bordeaux, who has called on the governor and others to investigate this.
So you think this is a right-wing conspiracy?
But the thing is that had we not sort of had this push by the Congresswoman and others sort of being outraged, we would have never known about it. But the bottom line is that why are Republicans not saying more? Why are they saying, no, keep it the way it was? We feel that we can benefit from that, right? And it's our number one comeback on voter suppression. And so I think that this is why, I said this last week, this trial that's going on about the irregularities and the roadblocks that happened in 2018 and some that happened in 2020, this is why you have that trial. Because now, guess what? In 2023, we're going to be talking about this. And don't let the voter turnout be lower than expected.
So is it a conspiracy that 2 million voters who were registered didn't vote? Is that somehow
those 2 million voters didn't come out field because your president told them to stay home?
Well, but that's ridiculous.
No,
that's
2 million, but that's
but the number goes up.
It was enough.
David Perdue says it was 900,000.
You've even admitted, and we all know this, political scientists cite this, the apathy is a huge problem for both parties.
Because we're all sick and tired of it.
And you know, there's
People should
registered
be
voters.
registered,
So
be able to register.
you're missing a big point
They
about
should be able to
voter
register.
apathy.
It was a change, and y'all not
I got to
saying
get on to
anything
this next one because this is an important one. 5 voters in the 14th Congressional District are getting the chance to move forward with a push to get incumbent Marjorie Taylor Greene off the ballot. A federal judge has allowed this case to move forward in a Georgia administrative court, and I think at the time of this taping, she's taking the stand right now. So just Phil, this group is basically saying Greene is not qualified to be on the ballot because of her actions leading up to January 6th. Now, this is a complicated legal case, but does it have merit?
I don't think it does. I've talked to lawyers of all stripes, Democrat and Republican, and they're citing the 14th Amendment, and this goes back to when the Confederacy was defeated, and there was amnesty provisions, and so this is not an issue that should be dealt with in the courtroom in this fashion, is what I'm hearing from the legal community. So I think let the voters decide at the ballot box and who you want as your congressperson.
Melita, there are many Democrats who disagree, of course, with her antics. Many of the Republicans on that side as well, but she is a sitting congresswoman. So shouldn't the voters, to Phil's point, decide whether she stays in office or not?
Well, I like the fact that a federal judge has already ordered this hearing to take place, and I think most people do respect Judge Amy Totenberg. And I believe that Judge Charles Boudreaux, who's hearing the case on behalf of the state, is not someone to be fooled with. He certainly gave off the air of great authority, and I'm not going to let anybody mess with my courtroom when he started the proceedings, even though they were boring. I think we all get spoiled by TV cop shows where there's a verdict in less than an hour, and we forget that real court hearings can be quite boring.
So just, the 14th Amendment, of course, had this provision in it. And then in 1872, they repealed this provision. 1919, it was used, the only other time it's been used is in 1919. It was to keep a socialist off the ballot. And it was used successfully in that case. I think because of the case in North Carolina that was decided the way it was for Matthew Cawthorn, I don't think it's going to go anywhere here. It's too close to the primary. There's a number of different reasons, but I think it's fair to hear it. Okay, I think that everybody got to get their day in court, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
We'll be watching and discussing. Coming up, Fulton District Attorney Fani Willis sounding the alarm after a judge set bond for the man accused of shooting an Atlanta police officer 6 times. We'll discuss.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Well, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis filed an emergency motion after a judge set bond for Christian Eppinger. Now, you may remember he's facing 13 charges, including attempted murder for shooting APD officer David Rogers 6 times. He managed to survive. Willis called Eppinger an extremely dangerous gang member. Now, Phil, we've talked about this before because APD and others, they make the arrests, but then the judges let them out.
This is typical of having a liberal, permissive judge not even looking at the fact that a probation hold by the Superior Court was on this scumbag. And she's getting, rightly so, a lot of criticism. She is appointed by just one person, Chris Brasher, who's the chief judge of the Fulton County Superior Court. He is the only person, and this is not good, that can either appoint this person or discipline them or get rid of them. And so now, as we tape, this is going before Superior Court Judge Craig Schwall. It always should have gone before a Superior Court anyway. Alexandra Manning, should have called Judge Schwall and said, oh, there's a probation hold, I'll just let you handle it. So this person will never get out of jail. That's the good news.
We could only hope. And he is still behind bars, Melita, as we speak right now.
Yes, because of the probation hold and because of the long rap sheet. And this is the kind of thing that's the system got clogged up during COVID for some of these bond hearings, and there are also time limits that a bond hearing must be held. So this was very poor handling of this by the court system. Thankfully, there's the safeguard of having the emergency hearing to keep him in jail, to perhaps revoke the bond. But this whole connection of gangs and certain parts of the music industry and the increase in gun violence in Atlanta, all of that some of it is interconnected, and the law enforcement and court system need to get a handle on it.
Well, then that leads us to our next story, which is Wallet Hub out with a terrible ranking for the city of Atlanta, but probably not surprising to many of us. During the pandemic, Atlanta had the third highest homicide rate. Only Cincinnati and New Orleans were worse. They're actually even still up this year, 56 so far this year compared to 38 the same time last year.
Well, this is why you know that the mayor's got to make a change. I've been really spending a lot of time talking to Atlanta police officers. Matter of fact, a couple of my friends who I went to Clark Atlanta University with are serving on the force, and the number one question I ask them is, how's the morale? So I think the morale is up. And then as far as retention, that's going better. But these crime stats, Lori, I mean, they're real. And I complimented the mayor. I think the mayor's doing everything he possibly can with the support of others, with the DA, with the judges, to keep these violent criminals off the street. I talked about this last week. He took 24 people who were fugitives off the streets of Atlanta. And so I think you'll see a turn in these statistics. I'm not just going to blame it on COVID, because definitely COVID had a lot to do with it. But I think now you see a new leadership. The morale is up. We're trying to hire more officers at the city of Atlanta. And ultimately, I think that you got to become smarter on crime. That's why I like that the cameras are being installed and that they're tracking these people. And we do have a gang problem in Atlanta that needs to be addressed as well.
And Martha, to that, I mean, there are things that are being done. I mean, Theron mentioned the cameras. There are new cameras going up in Piedmont Park after this horrific killing. But is he doing enough at this point? The mayor,
I think he's doing enough at this point, and I think that Fonnie Willis went a long way to really show she was going to back up Atlanta Police Department by the statements that she made and how she handled this particular incident we were just talking about. But I think it's going to take a lot more of that, right? It's going to take a consistency, and that's what we're going to need now. I think initially he's doing the right things, but we've got to see the fruit of them.
And Phil, it's going to be everybody working together: the DA, the courts, right? And the mayor's office. And the police officers. I
also appreciate DA Fonnie Willis. She's far, far better than the predecessor Paul Howard. But I will say this, going back to the judges, and this is something a mayor can't control, but the city council and the mayor could stop this no cash bail, where you've got people out the next day that are hardened criminals, and they don't. And I think this is happening in other cities. In Sandy Springs, where I live, there isn't. No, you've got to have cash bail, and that's why our crime rate is overall down. And it's what a comparison to Atlanta.
All right, I got to wrap it there unless you want to say anything on the cash bail, Melita. All right, we'll be back, everybody, with winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Melita, we'll start with you.
Thanks. My winner this week is Wandreen Shea Moss, an election department employee in Fulton County, who's receiving the prestigious John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award. She's one of 3 election officials across the nation being honored, and she's honored alongside the president of Ukraine. And then my loser is Park Ridge Health System. They have 4 hospitals in Chattanooga, and they're part of a national for-profit hospital chain, and they're fighting a Georgia community, Fort Oglethorpe's process for seeking approval for a new state-of-the-art, smaller hospital in that community. And that's just poor form.
All right, Phil.
Well, I've got a winner who is a journalistic colleague of mine, Cindy Morley. She was recently honored by the Georgia Senate for her public service, for being a journalism watchdog. She works with my company, Insider Advantage Georgia, and James Magazine, so hats off to her. And also my loser has got to be this unelected Fulton County magistrate judge who really screwed this up. And as I read the law, only a Superior Court judge can handle bonds. And so Alexandra Manning ought to be disciplined or even removed by the chief judge in Fulton County.
Darren.
I want to devote my entire winners and losers section to Dr. Thomas Cole, Jr., who's the first president of Clark Atlanta University. Lori, he was my president at Clark Atlanta University, unfortunately passed at the age of 81. And one of the last conversations I had with him was about this show, and him and his wife, Brenda, watches the show religiously. So I just want to send my condolences out to the Cole family, to Brenda, to Tom, and to Kelly. And just really, highlight him in a big way because he was serving a dual role as Clark College and Atlanta University was going through the consolidation. He increased the enrollment from 3,200 to 5,200.
Wow.
And the most personal story I ever had about him is that the day of my graduation, he was riding down Beckwith, and he allowed me to jump in the car with him, and he took me to graduation. So I definitely am going to miss him, but I think he was one of the best presidents we've ever had at Clark Atlanta University.
Some great memories.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great guy. All right, Martha.
So anybody who knows me knows I'm a St. Bernard person. We've had him for years and years and years. And I just want to give a shout out to Sarah Lynn Smith, who's the vet that runs the St. Bernard Rescue for Georgia. It's in Milledgeville, and that's where we got our last little sweetheart when we lost our last dog, and we replaced her with a sweet rescue St. Bernard. It is really yeoman's work to take care of like 25 St. Bernards. It's something. I don't have 25. She does. She's doing great. And then, of course, other winner is Fonnie Willis. I think she's doing a fantastic job, and she's standing up for the right thing in Fulton County Court. I may not like some things she does, but she's a winner this week.
All right, everybody, thank you. And thank you so much for watching. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.